Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Soul Sense podcast from Samaritan's Well here in Dallas-Fort Worth area. We have a special guest again today. Her name is Emma Donaldson. She's a licensed professional counselor in the Atlanta, Georgia area, and she's certified as a perinatal mental health specialist. And so that means she's going to be covering everything postpartum, anxiety, intrusive thoughts, identity shifts. There's so much there, but we're just so excited to have you here today, Emma. Thanks for being on.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark. I'm excited to talk with you.
Tell us first, I know you have children, but tell us first kind of what got you interested in this whole area, because, you know, like we were talking before the podcast started, we didn't get this in graduate school. We didn't get work on postpartum depression, most of us. How did you get started in this area a few years ago?
Yes, so I'm a mom of three, and okay. I've been a therapist longer than I've been a mom. So was doing this work, seeing clients weekly, and had pregnant and postpartum women on my caseload. Could see that they were struggling, but never really tied in how their mental health issue was tied into their life transition of becoming a mom, being pregnant, and then transitioning to being postpartum. Did not have the tools to understand that from a mental health perspective at all. And it wasn't until I entered that life transition myself with my first child that I started to notice, like, good grief, I'm anxious. I'm so anxious. And I'm experiencing all of these thoughts and worries. And I started to bounce them off of a few friends, some of them who were also in the field who are therapists. And just this normalization of, yeah, that totally happens. And even some therapists that I worked with who were years older than me and had adult children. And they're like, I experienced that too, and was really concerned, didn't want to tell anyone, wasn't really sure what it was. And that was kind of the end of the conversation. We didn't really know where else to go from there. And so I became dissatisfied with that for myself, because I was like, this is not sustainable if I want to have more than one child. Like, I can't be helicopter mom. And then also for my clients, I started to see similarities in some of them. And so that led me to scour Google and figure out what certifications or CEs, like what knowledge can I get my hands on? What books can I read to learn more about the topic? And that's when I came across PSI, which has a certification for perinatal mental health, and that covers pregnancy and postpartum as well. So did that coursework, became certified in that in 2023, and have now completely shifted my focus. I pretty much only see pregnant and postpartum women and couples where the wife is pregnant or postpartum.
Wow. We need people like you specializing in this. And, you know, just recently, I had a young pregnant mother in, and, you know, just the most basic thing that can affect your mental health is her body is changing. And, you know, if you have body image issues and some have more than others, that's just one simple piece of it. But there's so much more. Could you maybe speak to that for a moment? Then we can move into some of the other categories.
Yes, absolutely. So this is something I see a lot when a woman becomes pregnant or when she's freshly postpartum. Triggers of previous issues that they feel like they've dealt with and moved on from come circling back, right? And some of that is the nervous system burden that they now have. They're holding a lot more than they were before. Sometimes it's hormonal impact, especially postpartum. That's one of the biggest hormonal drops a woman will experience in her life is right after she gives birth. And so processing some of that and thinking, goodness, I did great work with my therapist and thought I was on the other side of this eating disorder or anxiety. And now I feel like it's kind of coming back tenfold. Body image stuff that you mentioned, and I don't know if the client was impacted by body dysmorphia or an eating disorder, but certainly, my goodness, a woman's body changes drastically during pregnancy and then drastically during postpartum. And so, of course, that could trigger some old wounds and have that resurface.
Yes, you can think that something is resolved, But then when it gets tested to the limit, like in pregnancy, there's so much drama and so much change. That's when you really know, okay, do we have more work to do or not? I think traditionally that hormonal drop that you talked about is one of the biggest things we'll think about. Could you just take a few minutes to unpack that? Because I know there's so much there that we could learn about this.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll try to explain it from a way that one of your listeners might hear it and have it really resonate.
Yes.
There's something called baby blues. And most of the time, if they give birth in a hospital, they might have the childbirth educator explain, you might experience some baby blues. Here's what it looks like, kind of like glossing over and passing over. But it
Hmm.
can be rather intense. It can look like frequent, intense bouts of crying for what feels like no reason. It can look like intense anxiety and worry. It can look like an adrenaline rush of not feeling like you're able to slow down enough to rest. You've got to watch this new baby sleep, even though you'd love to be sleeping yourself. You just feel like you can't even close your eyes because of
Wow.
hormonally everything that's surging inside of you. And so we really don't give this window of time what it's worth. If you think about traditionally, we've got visitors coming in, sometimes 12 hours after a mom has given birth, decisions being made, photographers coming in, taking newborn pictures. She now needs to get dressed and put on different clothes, even though her body is very much recovering. I mean, if she had a vaginal birth, that's a very intense experience. If she had a C-section, that's major abdominal surgery that she just experienced.
Right.
And so none of these things are bad. The topics that I just mentioned and the events that take place, but in some ways it feels a little tone deaf to what she just experienced and went through. Prolactin is increasing as her body is making milk now to prepare to nurse. Even if she chooses not to nurse, her body is still doing that process hormonally. And
Hmm.
so the impact, I think, is just so undervalued and underappreciated by society for the new mom. The new mom doesn't even know to be like, oh my goodness, this is a really big deal. This deserves some space and some margin. This is what I like to call a sacred newborn bubble, where I want to maybe think through, who do I want to invite into this space? What do I need right now? One of the best things
Right.
she can get is like a good meal, a great meal before she has to make decisions about new photographers coming in or which family member gets to hold the baby first. Another piece of that is the mother and the child bond. Hormonally, there's so much that's happening on the back end of that, and they're bonding for the first time. And sometimes that bond can get, I'll say, interrupted or impacted by well intended, loving friends and family wanting to come in and have their experience too. That doesn't need to have to happen in the first few hours, but oftentimes there's this societal expectation that it needs to or it's going to.
Hmm.
All of this impacts her nervous system, all of it. Even if she cognitively is like, I really want my child to meet my best friend, and I really
Sure.
want, my cousin to hold my baby. Her nervous system is also, she's fighting this biological instinct of, I think I also just want my baby to be close to me, and maybe I want to sleep through the night for a little bit and then introduce visitors, things like
Hmm.
that. So there's so much
Hmm.
happening.
And it really is, I don't know if we would use this term, but it seems to me that, all of these hormones that have perhaps in some ways become regulated while the child is inside now are dysregulated with the child suddenly being out. And the it seems natural that your body is going to take some time to have to balance out everything that was pumped through that umbilical cord, and now we might be nursing or just trying to get regulated. But I'm getting the idea from you that, even in the best of circumstances, that may take what, days or weeks or even months? What kind of timeline are we thinking about here?
That's a really good question. And I've heard lots of different things. I've heard the argument
Okay.
for it can take up to 12 weeks for you to, and here's the term you'll hear a lot, Marcus, feel like yourself again. But oftentimes what they're saying is have your hormones be regulated or more balanced. I've
Okay.
also
Okay.
heard healthcare professionals make an argument to say it can take a full year or even 18 months. for
Whoa.
things to be balanced. So I think giving it space and giving it the credit it deserves of, wow, this is a really intense thing that your body just did. And it's less to do with what you think about it and more to do with what's biologically happening to you in the moment, and creating space for that to process the way it needs to process, and not try to inform it of, well, you gave birth a week ago, you should be feeling up to doing whatever XYZ expectation is you may have for yourself.
I'm just thinking, Emma, it reminds me so much of grief. You can't just
Mm,
tell grief the size of package that you're going to fit it in, right? It kind of tells you how big the package is, and it kind of tells you
exactly.
how long it's going to last in a sense, right? You can't just manhandle it. You have to give it the respect it deserves. And it sounds very much like what you're talking about here. This
Mm.
deserves some respect because of the significance of it.
Absolutely. A great comparison and eloquently said. It deserves respect. And I think more respect than sometimes we realize. And that's part of
Mhm.
why I love talking about it and offering this education to people, because there's so much pressure to, like you said, package it and have it look like the 6 week mark. Once you get approved by your OB, you're just fine and good to go and you're no longer postpartum. The postpartum period actually lasts a full year. Some
Okay.
women will say it lasts longer than that. And I think, especially if
Okay.
we're dealing with a perinatal mood disorder or a nutritional deficiency, of course, we can see symptoms persist past that full year. But I like to tell clients, let's plan for the first year of your baby's life. You are
Mhm.
postpartum.
Tell us about a perinatal mood disorder and what does that
Yes.
look like? Because I'm sure that could be scary for a lot of mothers. Like, what is going on with me? Is there something wrong with me?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think most people will think of postpartum depression. That is
Okay.
maybe the most popularized one. There's several
Right.
others, but we'll start with postpartum depression. Um, what I hear a lot is this feels like a failure. No one wants to wear
Okay.
that badge of postpartum depression because feels like I'm not doing as good of a job as a mother as I want to be. I'm somehow not cut out for this.
Yeah.
I'm doing my baby a disservice. My baby needs a mom who's not depressed. And I know, are already hearing the cognitive distortions in that, which is fueling the depression, right?
Yes, and the
Um,
shame, right?
so much shame, so much shame. Like, I should be better than this. I have a friend who
Mhm.
just had a baby. She's bounced back. Why can't
Yeah.
I? She doesn't need medication. Why do I need medication? Things like that. So postpartum depression is certainly a big one. Postpartum anxiety, at least for my practice, I see that more than I see postpartum
Real You
depression.
see it more.
Yes, I see postpartum anxiety more. And within postpartum anxiety, I also see perinatal OCD, which is
Okay.
the onset of OCD either while you're pregnant or postpartum.
Okay.
And one of the red flags for this is the OCD onset is, like I said, in that perinatal period, but it's very specific to the baby and motherhood.
Okay.
So the obsessions and the compulsions performed aren't so much the other outer layers that we might see in OCD for someone who had an onset previously. And this person might have a history of an anxiety disorder. Certainly,
Mhm.
that can be like a risk factor for developing a perinatal mood disorder. But the OCD specifically, I mean, no, that wasn't present before. Just ruminating, becoming so obsessive around feeding things like feeding
Yeah.
times, schedules, diaper changes, all things that if the pediatrician saw might say, "Oh, well, I need you to tell me how many wet diapers they've had in the last 12
Right.
hours, so this is all good and fine." Nothing
Right.
in his head is saying, "Tell me about the tracking app. How often times do you spend on the tracking app, and what
Yes.
happens if you were to forget a diaper?" And you know what? A guesstimate is probably going to be fine. I don't need an exact number. So health professionals collide with women who have these, now for me, because I've learned these little
Right.
red flags, but they have no idea. And so the mom just keeps moving through the system, untreated and not acknowledged that she's struggling.
Wow. That is so significant, Emma, and I can see that because When you think about the classic OCD, a classic example is, oh, I have to check the door lock 6 times or 8 times before I go to bed. The key statement is have to. And,
Mhm.
you look at an example like that and you go, wow, that's so silly. You don't have to check the doorknob. But now we start talking about things like my baby's health and what the doctor says. And it seems so much more conducive to those have to thoughts. Oh,
Mhm.
I have to. And that can bleed in with certain people that are kind of maybe had some prerequisites, right, that we didn't know into that
Mhm.
perinatal OCD.
Yep, exactly right. So oftentimes, and again, like this is part of why I love having conversations with people like yourself about this, so that listeners can hear some of these thoughts and recognize, oh, maybe this is problematic. Maybe what has been, what has felt like an emergency or what has felt like the care and safety for my baby, maybe that's actually anxiety.
Yes.
And the anxiety is what we need to treat and not be so focused on the obsession. So I'll give you some examples. Obsessing over the baby's sleep, how long they've been asleep,
Okay.
checking to make sure that they're breathing is a big one. I'm just going to lay my hand on top of their back, go back to sleep. Oh, I can't go back to
Mhm.
sleep. I'm going to check one more time. There's the compulsion again. I got the that little hit of the reassurance. I'm
Yes.
my anxiety's pacified for a minute.
Yes.
But now I've just reinforced the cycle in my brain that I'm supposed to be anxious about this because at any moment this baby could have SIDS. Let me go back and touch them again. Things like that are a big one. Another one is this impacts how some women decide to feed their baby. So they might choose not to nurse, they might choose to pump or lean into the pumping relationship because they can
Mhm.
measure exactly how many ounces
Oh.
the baby is getting. You
Oh,
don't
okay.
know how many ounces they're getting unless
Oh,
you
that's
weigh them
true.
after a nursing session, which I've seen new moms do this as well. They buy a
Okay.
scale and they obsessively weigh
Oh,
after
wow.
every feed. Yes. So again,
Mm.
it's sneaky. And to your point, if it's around the safety and the well-being of a baby, well, of course that feels a lot more valid. But what happens if this goes untreated is we see it surpass that year mark. It's a
Yes.
full-blown mood disorder at this point.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, Emma, I had a very non-pregnant person. It was a 50-something-year-old male that came in with OCD this past year. And, one of the things that I teach when I'm working with people with OCD, which I do some, I don't specialize in it, but I do some, is I first help them recognize that they really are have to thoughts. I had a client years ago. She told me we were exploring where the thoughts her OCD started, and it was like first or second grade where she started saying, "Oh, I have to sort my clothes like this." And she just called them have to thoughts. And ever since then, I've called them have to thoughts. But one of the things I taught my client from this past year was when you have that thought, just say out loud, and especially if you're a believer, God, do I have to check the door 6 times? And you can literally just ask that question. Do I have to know this to the ounce or to the whatever? And it kind of puts it in perspective a bit when you ask that question. But what people really don't understand, and this is where I know you help them, is that it's a battle. Even if you have the logic or the understanding, it's a battle to break through, isn't it? To not measure to the ounce or not count or not check. Because I mean, I remember the first time our newborn was home, I was OCD the first night. Is he breathing? Is everything okay? But by the
Sure.
third night, I wasn't that worried. I'm like, man, he's made it 3
Right.
days. He'll probably make it 4. And he has. But so it's natural to have some of that initially, not so
Mhm.
good to have it weeks and months and a year later.
Totally. There's yes, so much I want to respond to about what you just said. I think the first thing is the last piece, which is it's natural and to be expected at the beginning. And what you're speaking to is the elevated nervous system that is, especially for moms, because they're being their brains are literally being rewired to care for and attune this baby. But it also impacts dads too. And wanting to be so careful and so sensitive, and you're scanning your environment for danger. All of that is biologically appropriate. The problem starts when a nervous system has been elevated like that for too long and without a break. That's when we see some of those spillover symptoms occur for sure. And then the second thing about the thoughts, I love that, the have to thoughts, and asking the Lord, is this something do I really have to check? The battle you described, I think, is that desire for certainty. And I just, if I can see the ounces in the bottle, I know that this baby got 6 ounces and the pediatrician said they need 6 ounces. So I'll have certainty that they're not going to die of SIDS because they had 6 ounces at this speed. That's oftentimes the train of thought that's happening for a new mom. And so I love ERP for this because I think it's just so effective in holding that uncertainty. And for the believer too, I love your thought about integrating and asking the Lord. We as believers do have certainty in a God who knows all things, who's sovereign over all things. And so that is definitely a tool that we can tap into and use. Is I'm struggling with this uncertainty of not knowing, but I'm not going to know. That's part of what I have to learn to tolerate. And I do know a God who knows. And that's comforting, right?
It's very comforting, Emma. And I try to teach my clients with respect that we all want to hold on to this illusion of control, I call it. But it's just that it's an illusion, right? If we can just remember, we can do what we can do. The mother has so much to offer, but getting it down to the ounce and the second in the moment is not really part of it. That really adds to her burden. Yeah.
Totally. Totally.
So
And
you
it's,
said that was the second one. Tell us about the anxiety part of those mood disorders with perinatal.
yes. So that was specific to OCD, what we just chatted about. There is
Hmm.
what looks like generalized anxiety, and that's what
Okay.
postpartum anxiety is. However, it's not generalized because it's very specific to motherhood, the baby, health and well-being of the baby. So that often looks like ruminating, and for those who don't know what that means, it's the hamster wheel thought. It's going around and around about the worry and feeling like that's productive, feeling like I'm doing something because I'm on this hamster wheel of the thought, but we're not actually going anywhere with it, which can lead to indecisiveness, or decision fatigue is a really popular term on social media and
Sure.
therapy world, just having that decision fatigue. I don't know. I don't think I can make this choice about which daycare to send them to because I've got the spreadsheets and I've looked at every possible outcome and I'm just too anxious to make the choice. Um, Certainly categories, I think there's different categories to the anxiety, but largely it's focused on the baby, how well am I mothering, and then health and safety. And sometimes that health and safety extends to other family members as well. Because remember, like hormonally, she's going through all of this, and if her nervous system has been on high alert for too long without a break,
Right.
that isn't just going to hit the baby, that's going to hit the older children as well, potentially the husband, and cause really intense uh, anxiety, and also the burnout of that anxiety of now I'm exhausted because I've been so anxious. And I feel like I've been productive because I've been worrying about the thing, but I actually haven't done, anything, made the decision, moved the needle, which then reinforces the shame, and kind of around and around we go. It can also look like social situations and being fearful of taking the baby in public or
Oh,
allowing
sure.
others to hold the baby. Um, a red flag to me is sometimes when I'll ask a mom, how old's your baby? And she'll say, 9 or 10 months. And then she'll describe some of their life and what things look like. And it sounds like she's talking about a newborn in terms of the schedule and the rigidity and the protections. And 8 or 9 months, this baby's probably sitting up, this baby's probably taking solids.
Hmm.
Um, and what she's describing is I've got a 6-week old that I've got to, protect from everything and anything. So not moving on with the baby oftentimes because we're so stuck in the must do anything at all costs to protect them.
That's helpful to understand, Emma. And do you find when you look at histories, is it typical if you have that perinatal anxiety issue that you had some anxiety or some worry tendencies before, but perhaps they've been amplified or even multiplied now that you've got the 3 week old, 3 month old, 9 month old?
Yes, oftentimes that is the case. There was a pre-existing anxiety disorder,
Okay.
or maybe they didn't meet the full criteria, but definitely a leaning around it. And oftentimes, a mom will have done great work. She'll have had tools that she used, she'll have different ways of thinking about things, coping strategies and skills, and really feel like she overcame a lot of her anxiety. And that's what can be so discouraging is she gets pregnant and then has the baby and she's like, golly, I'm experiencing all of this anxiety like I've never been in therapy before. And that can be incredibly discouraging and disheartening.
Absolutely. You know, one of our favorite chapters for anxiety is in Philippians 4. And the a translation I want to read from for just a second because it's so apropos says, "Be careful for nothing." A lot of translations say, "Be anxious for nothing." But why would one translation, the King James, say, "Be careful for nothing"? Well, careful is a compound word. Beautiful, if beautiful means full of beauty, what does careful mean? Full of care. So we have this incredible picture from Philippians 4. Be full of care for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, which is a specific request, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which passes all understanding, which means does it make sense, by the way? That doesn't make sense. It passes all understanding, shall keep your hearts and your minds through Christ Jesus. So it seems like when I work with people with anxiety, you work with a lot of the perinatal cases. When I work with people, they are holding onto their cares, and God bless them. It's almost like they're collecting cares and they get weighed down by them when God said the word also says casting your cares on him, but it's so hard for them to let go, isn't it? It's so hard because it's
Mm,
so important. It's so important.
mhm,
My child
mhm,
is so important. And of course, that's
mhm,
true. My child is more important. It's a whole nother level of trust and
mm.
surrender, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And I think I'm so glad you brought that verse up because I think it it's so true and it can be so misused at the same time, right? And I think that for Christian moms specifically, there's this element of a works-based faith, I think, that sometimes gets snuck in of, okay, if I can repeat the Bible verse, or if I can say the thing, or if I can ask people to pray for me, or even have me praying, then my anxiety will go away. I won't have the felt experience, right? The nervous system response. Exactly, exactly. They use the verse like the formula. And it's like, oh, but that's not exactly how it was meant to be applied. And um, part of, I think, not holding on to those cares and part of letting them go can look like asking for help, inviting others into your process, right? Maybe it for a season it looks like being on medication because maybe the cost of your anxiety is too high, and the risk of not being on medication is too high for your well-being and therefore your baby's well-being. And that can be a really hard conversation because there's lots of moms who don't want to be on medication, especially if they're nursing. They're concerned about what will the impacts be of my baby, and so it's a nuanced conversation for sure. It's not a right or wrong. You need to or you should never. Um, but sometimes that is the process of letting go of some of those cares. It can look like going to therapy and committing to the weekly therapy. It can look like letting some of the balls drop in your life. There's in this world of the internet and technology, there's more and more moms that are working from home and also not having childcare, especially while their baby's small. And it's a very tempting proposition because childcare is very expensive, right? So expensive. And if they're like, well, if my baby's just going to be sleeping and feeding and sleeping and feeding, maybe I can work from home. Well, but oh my goodness, the mental load that costs. And I think it goes back to the just because we can doesn't mean we should. And so applying that verse could look like maybe I need to reevaluate. Does it make sense for me to have some childcare so that I'm able to fully focus on my work and know that my child's well taken care of, and then we reunite after I'm done working? Or does it make sense for me to not work for a season and be home with my child and then return to work? Some of those conversations, right, I think are really helpful and important to pull from as well.
That's really good, Emma. That's very good. Here's a question that I think a lot of listeners would have. How could a mom tell the difference between normal new mom stress and, something that really may need some support or counseling or help?
That's such a good question. And I think it's probably different for every person because it depends on their unique circumstances, how their mental health was prior. But it sounds like maybe what you're asking for, what are some like yellow flags that
Yes.
they might need some attention and care? So yes, I
Mhm.
think some yellow flags that I often see is not rejoining your life with your baby after a certain period. And I'm
Okay.
hesitant to say what month that should be because like I said,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
different for everybody. But
It's
at
not
some
just a
point,
formula. Yeah.
exactly. But at some point, you and your baby need to integrate back into the world and make a new normal. It's a
Okay.
yellow flag to me when I see a mom preserving this. And at that point, it's no longer a newborn bubble. It really is isolation because she's anxious about or doesn't feel like she can or is feeling the hopelessness, helplessness of depression. Those are the things where I'm like, interesting. If you don't feel like you can get out and incorporate, or here's another example. Friends invite you to go over to their house and spend time, and spouses get to connect. You guys get to put the baby down in the guest room with the monitor and watch.
Sure.
And well, I can't even try to do that. They've got to be asleep in their crib with their sound machine on at 7 p.m. or else. That's a yellow flag to me. I'm curious about that. And again, depends on the age of the baby, but I'm wanting to know more at that point.
At three
Why is
weeks
that?
old, that's one thing, but at 13 months old, it's kind of a different. Yeah.
Exactly right. Exactly. So I think that's a yellow flag for sure is if you're not integrating back into life and building your baby into your life, concerns there. If you are finding yourself staying stuck on a thought for, I would say, and like hard to put a time frame on this, but more oftentimes than not. How about that? More oftentimes than not, if you are stuck on a thought and this ends up being an obsession around the sleep, around the safety of the baby, around others hurting the baby, this can look like intrusive thoughts too. Everyone experiences an intrusive thought in their life. That's why when I describe it, people are like, that makes sense. But if you're having intrusive thoughts constantly and they're centered around your child and yourself. I just had the thought of them falling down the stairs. I just had the thought of me taking the kitchen knife and hurting them or hurting myself. We got to get rid of all the kitchen knives. Yellow moving into a red flag for sure.
Yeah, and you're right. The intrusive thoughts, it's like, oh, if I'm on my back porch, it's not abnormal that a bee might be flying around or get close to me. It would be abnormal for me to be in the middle of a swarm of bees. We need to do something about that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, the
Yes.
intrusive
Yes.
thoughts, no question about it. Because I tell people, we all have different forms of temptations as believers. We understand the enemy tempts us. And I think that two very primary ways that he tempts us is through a customized temptation that you know, some demon's been working a lifetime to know exactly what my customized temptation is. But then I
Mhm.
say the bizarre temptations are like those intrusive thoughts. They come in and they're meant to dysregulate And I agree with
Hmm.
you completely. Bring that to someone, get some help for that, even though it might be scary for you, because
Yes.
there's absolutely ways to battle that.
Yes, 100%. And an intrusive thought is not a wanted thought. So if there's a new mom listening to this and you've had thoughts of yourself doing something to the baby and you're
Yes.
horrified by that, the fact that you're horrified means it's unwanted. It's an intrusive thought. It is not, I'm intending to harm my baby. DFACS is going to come. Someone's going to report me. It is very much fueled by anxiety and something that's 1000% treatable that you can get free from.
Yes, absolutely. And we've both seen that with people we've worked with over and over. And I will tell you, we don't really have time to go into it, but if you want to study Psalm 64, this is one of my mentors taught me is one of the places where we really understand how the enemy shoots their arrows. As a matter of fact, I'll give you one verse. It says, they sharpen their tongue like a sword and bend their bows to shoot their arrows, even bitter words. Those bitter words literally mean something that is distressing, it's heavy, it's some kind of discontentment, it's disturbing. And that's what these intrusive thoughts are. They're disturbing. And so, but don't fight it alone. I think we're both saying, don't fight it alone. Get some
Yes.
help for that.
Totally, totally. Last one would be sleep. Sleep is such a huge part of the postpartum experience and pregnancy too, certainly, but postpartum for sure. We can almost guarantee that you're going to experience sleep deprivation at some point, and
Yes.
that has a direct impact on your mental health. So I've seen it where moms have been incredibly anxious. Had I diagnosed them in that moment, they would have met the criteria for postpartum anxiety or postpartum depression. They get a week of sleep that's not broken up because they enlist family members to help, and they're a different person. That's not always the case, but that's one of the first things I start with when she's experiencing symptoms. How much sleep are you getting? Do you have anybody to help you with the night feeds? Because that's a huge game changer.
That is so good. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that you start with that because one of the most important things I ask my clients virtually every session is tell me about how you're doing with sleep. Because, like you said, it affects everything else. It can mimic depression, it can
Mm-hmm.
certainly increase anxiety. It causes confusion when you're not getting enough sleep. There's so many things. I think that's
Yes.
the perfect thing to start with, Emma. Emma, tell us a little bit about support. How are our churches doing with supporting postpartum moms?
Yeah, I would love to see our churches support new moms more than they do, and certainly it depends on your local church and what they're doing. But I
Hmm.
think as a big C church, right, um, really one recognizing that it's a sacred time for her and an early time for her, and accommodating. So small, what feels small but huge things, having a space where she can nurse and still listen to the sermon is a really big one. If she's not comfortable leaving the baby in the nursery yet, accommodating and making space, making it normal sometimes that there's crying babies in the service, I think is a huge one. I mean, I don't know who came up with that rule that you're not allowed the baby cries, but we all feel it. I feel it. You're like, oh, I don't want to disturb, right? But this baby needs to be in there just like everybody else and hear the gospel and if it's better for mom and baby to be together, her always sitting out of the service and not being able to hear the service and just going to church for the sake of going to church doesn't feel like a great option either. And community, like especially for the believer, she's finding her community at church. That's where she gets to have the conversations of how are you really doing and what's going on, right? And can I bring you a meal or can I take your older kids to the park this afternoon so you can rest with the baby? That's really what she needs is the support and the communication and the community from church. And so let's make it really attractive for her to be there and not have her feel like she's a burden when she comes in with the baby.
I love that. I really love that. And continuing that theme of support, which we anybody would instinctively know, wow, these mothers that we're talking about, they need support. Okay. So when it comes to husband, friend, or family members that are listening, what are some of the best things they can do to help their loved one?
Such a good question. I think for dads, and this is hard because they've gone through so much change, like,
Hmm.
especially if it's their first child, they've watched their wife be completely attuned and fixated on them to completely not, right?
Yes.
And so there's a grief and a loss process there for husbands and
There
dads as
is.
well. Totally want to name that. Um, and while she's taking care of this new baby, one of the best things you can do is take care of and serve her. So bring her meals to her bedside if she's still in bed right after giving birth. Take that off of her plate. Make sure that she's well nourished. Be an excellent diaper changer. Find things that you can do for her that are serving her and become excellent at them. um, Being able to process how you're doing and feeling with your community so that she's not hearing that you're feeling neglected, and she's also learning how to care for a baby and now she feels guilty that you feel neglected. Certainly there's a time and place to have that conversation, but I would say in the first few weeks that's probably not the time. um,
No.
and we can guarantee that a husband's going to experience that, because how could he not? It would make total sense. So I think that's a big piece. Oftentimes, the husbands do hear a lot of the mom's obsessions, anxieties, hopelessness experiences. And so I think they can be some of the biggest proponents for mom to take care of her mental health. Hey, you look like you're really having a hard time and not doing well. I'm going to bottle feed tonight so you can go in the guest room or on the couch and you can sleep and we need 6 hours of sleep to reset our brains, go through the REM cycle, right? Um, so that would be a big way. And then for friends and family, I think just continuing to ask and check in. I think sometimes what I hear is like a lot of new moms feel like they're a burden. And so just enforcing, hey, we're here for you, we care for you, whether your baby's 6 weeks, 6 months, 9 months, 15 months old. How are you doing? Like, what can we do to support you? Some people don't like this question of what can we do to support you because they feel like it puts more work on the mom. But I do think it's helpful to ask. And then it's part of the mom's responsibility to talk through. And maybe she says, I don't really know what I need. And then you can come up with some ideas. But the giving her the space to check in and not just assuming that she wants help with the meals or she wants someone else to hold the baby. Sometimes it's just having the physical presence of someone nearby who can talk with her.
Sure. And I remember, Emma, you've listed so many good things, but I remember one thing that I think I did pretty consistently early on after our childbirths, um, was back rubs, foot rubs, and finger rubs. My wife really liked that. It helped her to relax. So that was a simple thing I could do. But I had the other thought, Emma. I was like, oh, if I have a friend that's a husband of this and a newborn child, why don't I go mow his lawn so he could spend that time with his wife and child?
I love that. That's beautiful. Yes, taking things off of his plate so he's free to care for her well. I think that's
Hmm.
beautiful. And by the way, the back rubs and massages, it's not, you said simple, yes, but wow, does that make a huge impact? I mean, that can be so settling and so relaxing, and even just when you're touched out and tapped out of caring for a baby, to have someone else physically care for you like that is a really big deal.
Yes, and it brings a little oxytocin back, doesn't it? That massage. It has that.
Yes.
Now we're talking some good hormones here.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
what does it look like, Emma? Is part of this hormone regulation in that, let's say, year after you have a child? I mean, a lot of it has to be what, nutrition? Is it supplements? Is there a whole field there of understanding how to do the best you can for your body to get back on track?
Absolutely. This is such a good question. And I think it goes back to the sleep from what I've seen.
Okay.
That is such a game changer in regulating hormones. So are you getting longer stretches of sleep, even if it's broken up? That very much influences the balance coming back together. Supplements for sure, because a lot of women don't realize it, but they have different nutrition deficiencies after
Okay.
giving birth because the babies have taken what they needed And then if they choose to breastfeed after that, the babies are continuing to take what they need through the breast milk. And a
Hmm.
lot of moms are under eating, and they
Are they?
are not. Yes, and they're not eating the right things. And when I say right things, I mean like nutrient dense food. They're eating stuff that's quick, that's fast, because they want to make sure that they're caring for their baby well. And so that's why I mentioned one of the ways that husbands can support is bring her breakfast that's got some great protein, some really good omegas, fatty acids, some like sweet potatoes or other complex carbs, avocado, good fat. That's great for brain health and great for postpartum recovery.
Oh, that's a whole area, and you've just touched on several great examples I know that I've seen too for helping you to, to have the best brain at any moment that you can have is you've got to get those fats, those nutrients, and of course, I suppose like a lot of people have said, shop on that outside ring of the whole grocery store and
Right.
beware of everything on the inside ring.
Totally, totally. And you brought up supplements. This is another great one. There's postpartum tonics that they make now that have different
Really?
herbs that can be really helpful in replenishing nutrients and also balancing hormones. There's supplements designed for the postnatal period. So oftentimes you'll hear, well, just take a prenatal and keep taking that. And you can, and that's good. But
Mhm.
they have formulas designed for what your body experiences after the baby. So it's even better to take. It includes that vitamin D, which most women end up being deficient in as well.
Right.
And we know that the baby also needs the vitamin D. So if she's choosing to nurse, then that can pass through. So yeah, supplements for sure. It is almost instantaneous that after that baby comes out, the whole focus turns on to this baby and what they need, and that is good. But if mama's not cared for, the baby's really not getting what he or she needs.
No. No, if mom's not thriving, it's gonna be hard for the baby to thrive.
Yes, 100%.
Emma, if a mom listening today or a family member, if someone realizes that they need help, what's the first step you would encourage them to take?
If they're needing help, I would encourage them to tell someone.
Okay,
Tell someone over researching and Googling, because
good.
that is such a compulsion that ends up happening with perinatal anxiety, and specifically with the perinatal OCD that we talked about. It feels productive. You're scouring social media, you're reading Reddit blogs. Oh, this person had this experience too, and they took ashwagandha for it, and they feel better now. And
Sure.
you know, and you need someone who is in your life, who knows you, that is a safe person, um, can be known by, who you can share with, like, hey, I'm not doing well. Hey, I'm
Yeah.
actually really struggling. Hey, I really kind of miss my life before I had the baby. I've not been happy in 4 months, and my baby's 4 months old. Someone that you can be that level of honest with,
Mhm. Mhm.
that getting it outside of your body and outside of your head, and out into the world, even hearing yourself say it and then being met with compassion, that's one of the best things you can do. That doesn't resolve everything, but that's one of the best places to start, in my opinion. It breaks through that isolation that a lot of new moms find themselves in, and that white knuckling mentality of, I'll just keep going and maybe it'll get better.
And it kind of breaks through the shame too, right, Emma? If I tell
Mhm.
someone I'm kind of facing that fear of what are they going to think of me or am I a bad mom? And I'm just saying, hey, here's where I am. Maybe I need some help. And two heads are better than one. They've always said that, I've heard that for my whole life. And I really believe that's true. And you're right. We get on the internet and we either look for the magic pill or we make it worse than it is, or we make it less important than it is. And those are three really dangerous things from getting on there. Besides, when God made us to connect with each other. So if you share with your husband or your best friend or your mom or your pastor or your current counselor or whatever, because of course it is hard. It's like I have to admit, I've been depressed for 3 or 4 months or whatever. Yes, that's hard, but it's the first step toward getting help. Jesus said, "You
Absolutely.
have not because you ask not."
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I struggled with that question at first because I think I feel like I'm supposed to say, go to therapy.
Yeah.
Um, and that's the whole reason why I started this initiative of educating women and being a resource for women outside of the counseling room, is that
Hmm.
most new moms, if they don't already have a relationship with a therapist, they're not going to go to therapy.
Yes,
They hear
true.
that and they see it's one more thing for me to do, one more appointment I have to schedule. I don't have the time. I don't have the childcare. I already have analysis paralysis with all the decisions I have to make. I'm overwhelmed. Even if this feels helpful, or maybe it's helpful, the thought of taking the step to do it, I'm just not going to do it, you know? And so while education and reading through resources, watching videos I've created, joining like a support group, those are not substitutes for therapy. They can also be a great next step to even understanding fully, oh, what I'm experiencing, while it's common, it's not normal. And while I think that maybe this will get better on its own, I'm now learning maybe this doesn't get better on its own. Maybe I really can enjoy postpartum and be in a different headspace if I'm able to seek support and help. And it's a journey, right? It doesn't always begin with the immediate scour the internet, find a counselor that you think might be a good fit for you, and then schedule the appointment.
It's good. That is good. Emma, this has been so rich. I so appreciate you coming on. Are there any like final words that you wanted to make sure our listeners hear before we kind of wrap this up?
I think if I could just encourage any new moms that are listening who have not enjoyed being postpartum, who have really struggled, who feel like this is not what I thought it was going to be. Why does it seem like everyone else enjoys this and I'm not? What's wrong with me? I would love to just encourage them with there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. You're not doing this wrong. Um, like God gave you this gift of a child and made you a
Yes.
mother. And it's okay to be disappointed and have grief around what that's looked like. That is okay. That doesn't mean that it's bad. It doesn't mean that you're bad. It doesn't mean that you've done something wrong to create this. If you're experiencing postpartum anxiety, depression, OCD, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything to like earn this. It's not a reflection of poor faith. It does mean that you need some support and you need some help. And if you got nothing else from this podcast other than, yes, I think I probably need that, then I'm so thankful. And it was more than worth the time.
That is so good. Emma, what's the best way for people to reach you? I know you're in Atlanta.
Yes. So probably right now is through my email list. That's where I'm the most
Okay.
active. Joyful Mama Mental Wellness.
Okay.
They will see different areas of how I support women outside of my counseling practice through educational videos, through online support groups. So they can join that email list. Right now, I believe it says it's the wait list for the support group, which is called Known Motherhood. They can join that. When I open up the support group again, I'll let them know. But for now, I'm sharing reflections, sharing thoughts, things that we discussed today, stories of encouragement, things like that. And then I'm also on Instagram and TikTok.
Thank you so much. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for being a mother to 3 children and having your own family. And we just pray blessings on everything you put your hand to, Emma.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Thanks for being with us on Soul Sense. If something today resonated with you, take a moment, write it down, and reflect on it. And help us reach other people by subscribing, liking, leaving a comment, and sharing. We'll see you next time.